So today we're going to do something pretty exciting. We're going to take our actual website we've been building up until now, and we're going to take it and implement the responsive design that we talked about in the last video and actually make this website responsive. I do have a small demo that I want to show you so you can actually see what we're going to be making this video here. So this is the current website that we have, and you can see that we have, a header, we have a hero section, we have categories, about, different things in the footer. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this website and we're going to make it into this. So I have this finished version that we're going to build at the end here. What you're going to notice is a couple of things. I do, first of all, have a website here where you can see, a welcoming part. We do have the categories down here. We do have the about section, and everything is the exact same, except for it is a mobile format. And now you might be noticing a couple of things, which is that yes, we are going to be cutting out some things from the website, because when it comes to a mobile format, in some cases, things that might be really good to have inside a desktop format is probably not the best thing to have inside a mobile version because they take up too much space. So as you can see inside the current version here, we do have the testimonies at the bottom, but I decided, you know what, let's go ahead and just take that out because it's taking up too much space and the user have to scroll too much in order to get to the footer. So we're just going to cut that out and have this instead. Now there is one more thing that I want to talk to you about, which is something that is going to be a little bit out of, whatever we've been doing so far. Inside responsive websites, usually when it comes to a cell phone format, we don't have the navigation at the top with all the different menu items. Like you can do that if you want to and have all the menus, maybe like taking up a little bit of space at the top here. But usually you have something called a burger menu, which is a button that you can actually press. And then it opens up the menu on the screen so you can actually see the different menu items. And then of course you can close it down again. And I did actually create this using JavaScript, and JavaScript is part of front-end development, which is what HTML and CSS is also part of. But JavaScript is an actual programming language. So even though HTML and CSS is considered code, it's not considered programming because those are two different things. So I will show you how to do this using JavaScript, but I'm not going to explain it like a JavaScript tutorial. I'm just going to show you how to do it so you can copy paste it down and then it'll work. Essentially, it's not really complicated. It's fairly easy to do, but like I said, it's not really like a JavaScript tutorial. So with that said, let's actually go and take our website here and convert it into what I just showed you. So inside our Visual Studio Code, this is what we have so far. We have some HTML code and we have some CSS code, or HTML markup and CSS styling as it's also called. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the media queries that we talked about in the previous video, and we're going to start building this into a responsive website. So going down to the very bottom of my main.css, I'm going to start by making this CSS file into a responsive format. So we're going to go all the way down to the bottom here. And we're just simply going to create a media query like we learned how to do in the previous episode. Now, I do want to mention as well that we're not going to be building all the different versions, for example, the mobile, the tablet, the slightly larger monitor, and so forth. We're just going to make the mobile version here because it's exactly the same thing, but you just need to slightly alter it when it comes to the tablet version and so on. And I think you can do that yourself because it is the same thing as what we're about to do to the mobile version. So just take what we're building here for the mobile version and create a slightly larger screen version with the media queries, and then just do the same thing. So let's go ahead and start by creating a media query for 600 pixels. And we're just going to go ahead and make sure that this is going to be at the very bottom here. We could also create a small note just so we know exactly what this is. So we can say we have a note here, and we're just going to call this one mobile version, just to give it something that makes sense to us. And what we need to do here to begin with is just kind of take things from the top and down and then start changing the CSS. Remember, we don't have to copy everything because that's something I did when I started, doing HTML and CSS, all the way back in 2012, I believe. Geez, that's like 11 years ago. Okay, so time flies. Existential crisis here. So you don't just copy everything like this and then paste it down. Take what you need to change and put that inside the media query down there. So the first thing I want to do here is just kind of take my website and actually scale it down to a mobile format so we can actually see how it looks like, because we need to see how this looks like before we know exactly what CSS we want to change. So right now, by scaling it down, it is going to look something like this. So you can see everything is unproportional. We can actually scroll sideways because we have a wrapper that has a certain length, and that is kind of breaking our website. So there are a couple of things you need to look out for whenever you can scroll sideways like this. The first one, of course, being the wrapper, which is a fixed width, which is going to make sure that you can actually scroll sideways. So we need to change the wrapper. But usually when you can scroll sideways like this, just kind of look for something that has a width that is longer or wider than the mobile version, because that is what is typically breaking your design here. So by going inside our HTML and CSS, we can actually go in and grab our wrapper main, which is down here because it has a fixed pixel width. And we can go down to the bottom and paste that inside our media query, and then we can actually change the things that we want to change. In this case here, we're just going to go ahead and make sure we delete the margin, and it is still going to be centered because the CSS further up has centered it, so we don't need to repeat the same CSS unless we want to change it. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and change the width from a pixel amount to 100%. Now doing this is going to do something inside our browser. And as you can see inside the mobile version, we now have a wrapper that is fitting to the width of the device. So these sections down here, like the categories, the about section, and the footer is actually squeezing in to fit inside that spacing. However, we can still scroll sideways. So again, there's usually these two rules. Either you have a wrapper that is too wide. Now we did just change that, so that's not the issue. And the second thing that can cause this is content slipping outside the wrapper because there's just too much and we're kind of forcing it next to each other inside our HTML and CSS. So going a little bit further up and checking out this dark background here, because usually you can see what it is that is slipping out. You can now see that when we get up to the hero section, oh, we have some quotes that are kind of like being forced over here because we used a position styling. So that is the second thing we have to change now. So going back inside our styling, I do actually want to include a slight padding to my wrapper before we do that other thing with the hero section. Because right now, if I were to go inside the website and insert some text inside the website and have it fit inside the wrapper directly, it is actually going to be touching the border of my cell phone. So we want to make sure there's a little bit of spacing between content and the border of your phone just to make it look a little bit nicer. So what I'll do here is I will go in and instead of 100%, I'm actually going to set this one to 80%. So we have 10 pixels on each side right now because remember, the wrapper is being centered to the screen. So we could actually just say 80%, and then that is going to allow for the content to have 10 pixels of spacing on each side. And again, we can always go in and just refresh to see how that looks like. So going down here, you can right now see that we have a little bit more of spacing when it comes to the sides here, just to make sure that there's nothing touching the sides. It's actually very easy to see down here at the bottom because we have like pointing at the screen, like you can see what I'm referring to. But right here, you can see there's a 10 pixel gap. And on the other side, there's a 10 pixel gap. So it's not touching the side of my device, which is what we want to have. So going back inside our CSS code, what we can actually do is we can go down and start creating something for the header and just work our way down as we go. So I do want to grab my header main, which is right now at the very top of my file here. So we're just going to go up and say, where is the header main? Right there. Now, we're also going to be changing the logo. So we do also want to make sure we grab the logo here. And then we're just going to paste it down at the bottom here. So we're just going to go in, paste it in. And then we just want to change the things that needs to be changed and remove everything else. Because like I said, we don't want to repeat CSS inside our stylings down here. Now, currently, as I'm looking at this, I can actually see that we don't need to change anything in regards to the header-main. We still do need to have it position fixed to the top of the website. So even though the user is scrolling inside your mobile device, we still want it to be fixed up there. So everything that is in here is actually like it's supposed to be. So I don't want to touch anything. So we can't just go ahead and delete this. And instead, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the logo, because this one we do actually need to change. Right now at the top of the website, the logo is kind of like being pushed towards the center of my website because, you know, it's like 60 pixels. So instead, we're going to go in and we're going to say this one is going to be something more like 20 pixels. Now, we don't need to change anything else here, so we can just go ahead and delete that. So we're just going to have the padding left set to 20 pixels. So it's going to move over a little bit there. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the actual navigation here is not going to appearing inside the website, because as you can see, the navigation is going over, it's taking up a lot of space. And instead, we want to create this burger menu that I talked about at the beginning. So what we can do here is we can go inside our website, and I can grab this one and actually set it to not display inside our website, because we don't want it to be shown inside the website since we want to replace it with something else. So I'm just going to go inside my media queries at the bottom here, paste it in, and I want to set this one to display as none. Doing this and going inside the website, we can actually see that when I refresh it, we can no longer see the navigation inside the website. So far this is good. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the social media icons that we have on the side over here and make sure they're only touching, 20 pixels from the side. So just like before with the logo, we can do the same thing here. So going up to our social media, which is right down here, header-main-sm. I'm going to copy this because you can see we have that padding right set to 60 pixels. And I'm going to paste it inside my media query down here. So you're just going to paste it down. And I want to make sure it's only 20 pixels from the right. And I can actually go ahead and just delete everything else in here because everything else is perfectly fine. So doing that, going inside our browser, refreshing, you can now see that we only have them 20 pixels from the side. Now, I do know that inside this version over here, we didn't actually have any social media links, but let's go ahead and make sure they're actually included inside the website here. Maybe like to the left of the burger menu or something, just so people can see it. So having done that, the next thing we want to fix is the actual quotes down here, because right now we have all these quotes taking up a lot of space, and this is actually part of our index.css. So not the main.css file, but the index.css. So going inside the index.css, we want to go down to the very bottom, and we want to make sure that we have these media queries down here as well. So what we could do is just go inside our main.css and copy everything to make sure that we have everything the exact same way. Paste it down at the bottom here. So we have the comment and we have the media queries, and just kind of delete all the different styling we have in here. So now we can actually start styling things from inside the index page, not inside the header and the footer. So doing this, I can actually go up to the top here and grab our quotes. And as you can see up here at the top, right above the category section, we do have main quotes that we can actually grab. So I'm going to take this and copy it, go down inside my media queries and paste it in. And then we can actually change this one to display as none. So just like before, going back inside our website and refreshing it, you can now see that the quotes are gone and we can't actually see them anymore. Now, as you can see, there's still a little bit of spacing going on over here. And that is because some of the content inside the hero section is essentially still taking up too much space. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take it one at a time and just kind of change everything in here like we wanted to in order to actually make it fit a slightly smaller screen. So going inside our styling again, I'm going to go to the very top and I'm just going to take this one at a time. So currently we want to grab, first of all, the main. Actually, let's just go ahead and copy everything and then we can delete what we don't need once we get further down. So everything that has to do with the main section over here, let's just go ahead and copy all of that. I'm just not going to do anything to the category part. I'm just going to paste it in right on top of the main quotes here because it is technically inside our styling before the main quotes. So I'm just going to paste it in here. Inside our main tag here, the first thing I want to do is I want to change our align items so it doesn't say center, but I want to have a flex end, which means that we're not going to have it centered vertically inside our container here, but at the bottom instead. And the reason for that, just to show you, if we were to go inside the finished version, is that I don't want to cover my face with all these different pieces of text and stuff down here. So I have it at the bottom of the hero section down here, just to make sure that it's on my shirt instead. So I want to be at the end of this flex container. So going back in here, I'm just going to delete everything else because everything else is perfectly fine. And I just want to make sure that instead of center, we say flex end. Now, currently, this is actually going to make it go all the way down to the bottom of the hero section. So I just want to have a slight gap down there. So what I want to do here is I want to grab my main intro. So we're actually going to create some new styling here and not change something. And I want to take this and I want to make sure that the main intro, which is the part that has my text in it and the call to action button and everything there, and I want to make sure there's a little bit of a padding at the bottom there. So we're going to say there is a padding dash bottom, and I'm going to set this one to 8 view height, just to give it a little bit of spacing there. So we're going to save this one, and just to check how this looks like, going inside the website here, refreshing it, you can now see that it is actually going to the bottom instead. It's a little bit closer down here, but there's a little bit of a gap going on. And now we get to something important. We're actually going to change the text size inside this main section, because right now, one of the reasons why we have so much space going on and we can scroll sideways is because the text is kind of big. It's taking up too much space. So instead of 96 REM, instead, I want to make this one something more like 50 REM, which is 50 pixels. So we're going to say 5. Now, I don't actually know if we're going to change the line height right now because we haven't actually seen the changes, but I do want to make sure that we go in and actually align this text to the center of my screen, because I do want to have it centered inside the mobile version. I just think it looks a little bit better. So in this case here, I want to say text align center. Inside the main P section down here, which is the paragraph right underneath the big piece or chunk of text that we have going on inside the hero section, I do also want to change a couple of things here. So the first thing I want to change is I also want to align this text to the center, just like with the main H1 tag up there. I will also go ahead and create a padding to the sides, because right now this one doesn't have a wrapper, which means that we don't have that little bit of a gap of a spacing that I talked about when we created the wrapper styling inside the mobile version. So we do need to do that manually here. So I'm going to go down. I'm just going to go ahead and set a padding. And I want to say 0 from the top and bottom. Now, in my notes here, I do actually have it written that I use 20 pixels for this final version, but let's actually go ahead and do the same thing as inside the wrapper. Let's make this 10% instead. In this case here, I do also want to scale down the text a little bit. So instead of 1.8, let's actually go ahead and do 1.6, just to make sure we have a little bit of a slightly smaller piece of text there. And again, with the line height, I don't know if we're going to be changing it, so let's go ahead and save it for now. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to change the main anchor tag, which is inside the hero section, which is the call to action button that we have in here. Now, currently, I don't want to change anything other than just making sure that this one is centered inside this website here. And essentially, all you need to do in order to do that is to give it a margin set to, again, just like with the wrapper, 0 auto. And this is going to make sure that it's centered horizontally inside our hero section. Now, I do think that we want to maybe have a slight gap between the button and the text above it. So let's make sure it doesn't say 0, but instead maybe like 30 pixels. And this is pretty much all we're going to be changing in here inside the hero section. So going down and just copying everything all the way down to the main quotes, because remember, that is where we set this one to display none. We're just going to delete everything. And just like that, going inside the website, refreshing it here, you can now see that we have something that looks a little bit closer to my version here. Now, I do think that maybe, going back and forward here, we can actually see the 10% of padding on the sides might be a little bit too much. So maybe instead of using a percentage, let's go ahead and use a pixel amount and also change that inside the wrapper inside the website here. So what I'll do is I want to go back in here, and instead of using a 10%, I do want to use 20 pixels instead. And I'm also going to go back inside my main.css, and inside the wrapper here, instead of saying 80%, I'm going to go in and use the count method, and I'm going to say 100% minus 20 pixels, which means that we're going to have 10 pixels on each side. Now, just in the case of the hero section here, because some of you might point this out, yes, we should technically right now be setting this one to 10 pixels to match inside the wrapper. But I do think that it's important that we have a little bit more spacing inside the hero section. So saving this and refreshing the website just to see how it looks like, going back in here, refresh, you can now see it looks a lot closer to what we have in here. It's actually almost practically identical. And this is, of course, where we need to think about the line height, because right now, as you can see, there's a little bit more of a line height inside my version, the final one that I showed you. And you don't necessarily have to have it in this way, but you just kind of like take a look at this and think, okay, does this look good? I think currently I might want to have a slightly more, a little bit more of a line height when it comes to this version here, because usually we want to have a little bit more spacing when it comes to larger letters. And right now the spacing in between the paragraph here and the H1 tag is quite close to each other. So let's go ahead and go back inside our styling here, inside the index.css. And inside the line height, which is right here, let's go ahead and set this one to something more like 2.5. and see how that looks like. So going back in here, refreshing, you can now see we have something that looks quite better. Now, you could also argue in here that using a smaller text size for the paragraph might not be a good idea because this is a mobile version and usually that is a smaller screen that you have to look at. So you could always go in and actually change this. So instead of scaling it down to 1.6, you could always just remove it and just keep it at 1.8. Just be aware that because we went inside the index.html and created these breakpoints in order to make the text look better inside the desktop version, this one is actually going to be affecting the desktop version as well. And again, it's not something that is going to be breaking anything or messing anything up, just the visuals, essentially. But it will make the paragraph not look the same inside the desktop version. So if I were to save this and actually show how this would look like, when I refresh it, I think it looks better inside the mobile version because now you can more read the text. But if I were to exit here, you can also see that the text is looking like this. So we don't have those breakpoints. What we could do instead is actually to set a max width. So what I could do is I can go inside my CSS here, and inside the desktop version at the very top here, let's go ahead and set a max width when it comes to the paragraph. So instead of using all these breakpoints, we're going to fix this in another way. So right here where we have the main paragraph, we have something called max width, which means that we want to make sure that if the width of this paragraph goes beyond a certain length, then we don't want to allow it to go further than that. So I could go in here and say that I want to have it something like, again, I actually have no idea what width we're going to use here. So let's just go ahead and do this with 300 pixels and see how that looks like. So if I were to refresh it here, you can see, oh, okay, that's not quite, it's not wide enough. So let's go ahead and add a little bit more to that. So instead we could, for example, say 500 pixels. Going back in here, refreshing, and that looks a lot better. So instead of having these breakpoints inside the HTML, we can just go and set a max width instead to scale down the sizing of the text, because when we go inside the mobile version, this is going to fix everything in terms of the mobile version as well. So just a small sidetrack here to teach you how to create a max width for a paragraph. Then you can do that using max width. So with that said, the next thing we're going to change, because right now the hero section is actually looking really good. And we don't scroll sideways anymore because we fixed everything when it came to the sizing. So now what we want to do is we want to fix the next section, which is the categories down here. If I check out the finished version over here, you can actually see that my categories is looking slightly different. So we have a little bit of a less spacing when it comes to the text, to the category section here. And we do also have the boxes going a lot further out and just changing a little bit. And I did also make sure that the text is not going on 2 lines, but it's just, fitting inside the container. So we want to make sure we do that. So going inside the CSS, I'm going to go up inside the category section. So we're going to scroll down to right here. As you can see, it starts right there. And we're just going to go and grab the things that we need. So let's just go and copy everything and then delete as we go on. So we're going to copy all the way down to the end of the category section, which is right here, and paste it in below inside our media query down here. And again, you could also include the comment if you wanted to have comments inside the media query where you say, oh, this is the category section start or something. I'm just not going to do that right now. So let's just go ahead and continue from here. So this is the index category section, and we just need to take a look at this and see if there's anything we want to change. Now, I do actually have something I want to change here inside the first one, because right now inside the desktop version, just to kind of show you, we do actually have all these containers going next to each other, which is perfectly fine inside the desktop version. But in order to do this, we actually created a column gap inside the flex box to make sure they had a little bit of spacing between each other. And this is not really going to work out when it comes to the mobile version, because right now we do have that spacing, but as a column and not as rows. So what I want to make sure I do is I want to change the column gap. So we don't have a column gap anymore, but instead we have a row gap. So we're to save that, and just to show how this looks like, you can see we have a little bit of spacing. The next thing I want to change is the padding, and that is actually the last thing I want to change in here. So we're just going to delete everything else. The padding is not going to be 60 pixels from the top and bottom, and then 0 from the left and right. But instead, we want to make sure we create 40 pixels from the top and then only 20 pixels from the bottom, because what this is going to fix is the entire category section is going to have that spacing that I talked about. So instead of having that large gap when it comes to the top here, and the same thing for the bottom down here, we want to have the spacing the way we want it to. When I refresh it, we're going to have a slightly smaller spacing at the bottom, And the top here is also going to be slightly smaller. The next thing I want to change is the paragraph in here, which is the category title that we have at the top there. So right now we have a padding bottom set to 40, and I actually just want to set this one to 20. Everything else we can go and delete, and then we can go inside the website, refresh it, and then you can see we have a slightly smaller spacing there. And the last thing we essentially need to change in order to get this working like we wanted to for the mobile version is just to make sure the width of these boxes here are a little bit wider and a little bit smaller, because right now there's, it's more like a box instead of a long box, so to speak. A square, it's called. We don't want it to be a square. We want it to be a rectangle instead. So going back in here, we want to make sure we change the category box because this is the one we want to change. Everything else down here, we don't actually need to do anything to. So let's actually just go and delete everything down here all the way up to category dash box. The only thing I'm going to be touching in here is actually going to be the width and the height. And what I want to do to this one for the width is I want to set it to 100%, and then changing the height to something like 160 pixels is actually what I have inside my notes here. So just going to make sure to change that to that. Going inside the website, you can now see that everything is going to look like this. And as you can see, all the content is going all the way from the left to the right side. And that is because right now we don't actually have a wrapper applied to the category section. We do have a wrapper around the about section and the footer down here, but not when it comes to the category section, because that's just not how we set up our website. So what I can do here is I can either go in and actually apply the wrapper inside the HTML. That would actually not break anything inside the desktop version. But I also could just go in here and just say the width is going to be a calc method. And I want to set this one to 100%. And I want to minus it with 20 pixels, which is the exact same thing we did for the wrapper there. So saving this, going inside the website, we now have the same thing for when it comes to the wrapper. Now I do also want to make sure I change the row gap, because right now I want it to match with the spacing I have on the side of the screen. So I'm going to go back inside my row gap, and instead of 20 pixels, I'm going to set this one to 10 pixels. So going back in here, we can now see that everything is matching like we want it to, and we have something that looks wonderful. So going down to the about section, we're going to start changing things as well. So the same thing we're going to do, we're going to go inside our styling in here, and we're going to go to where the about section starts. We're just going to copy everything all the way down. So just going to copy, 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 and go. We can actually skip this part because we don't actually need to have these with us here. So we can actually copy all of this, go down to the bottom, and paste it all in. So we have to remember the last one is the index category box. So we paste it in. And then we go up to index category box, which is right here. So the about section starts right here. So this is where we need to start changing things. Now, I don't actually want to change anything about the container itself. So let's go and delete that one. But I do want to make some changes to the about dash flex here. The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure there is a row gap instead of a column gap. So just like with the last previous section, we want to make sure all the content is not next to each other, but below each other. And there's actually something we need to fix here in order to do that, because right now we do have a flex container going on. But if you were to take a look at the website, you can see, oh, everything is going next to each other. How do we make things go below each other inside a flex container? Well, we do that by applying a flex wrap, and then we set it to wrap, because as a default, it is set to no wrap. So we want to make sure that all the content, if there's too much squishing going on, that it actually goes below each other. So doing that and going back inside the website just to show you, everything is going to go below each other. So this is something that we want to have happen. The next thing I want to do here is I want to make sure that we don't have a column gap, but like I said, a row gap. So just going to delete everything else and set a row gap to something like, let's make it 20 pixels. So we're just going to do that, go back in here. And then you can see we have a little bit of spacing going on. The next thing we need to change is the image, because right now this is quite big. If I were to go inside this version of my website here, you can actually see that I decided to scale it down a little bit because it is way too big inside this version here. So going back in here, the next thing I want to actually change is going to be the image. Now, instead of setting this one to a fixed pixel amount, let's actually go and make this into a percentage, because different devices have different resolutions. So 300 pixels might look a little bit different on this device like it might do on another device. So let's go ahead and make this one into 60% instead. And that is basically all we're going to do inside this one. So we're just going to delete everything else. And now it is important to point out here that right now we're actually changing the image itself And the image is actually inside a container. If I were to go inside my HTML here and go down to the About section, you can actually see that my image right now is inside a container called index about image. And because it's inside this container here, it is actually not going to be doing like we wanted to. If I refresh it here, you can actually see it's not centered inside my screen here. And that is because the container for the image is not being changed right now. So the image has changed size, but we need to make sure the container it's inside of is being centered to the screen. So going back inside our CSS, I want to make sure I go in, and I'm just going to go ahead and style the container itself. So we're actually going to create some styling here that is not going to target the image, but the container. And what I'm going to do here is I want to make sure that this one is set to 60%, but I do actually want to make the image 100% because I want it to be 100% of the container, which is now 60%. Does that make sense? Like we just swapped it around essentially. So saving this, going inside the website, refreshing it, you can now see that everything is centered. And again, the reason that everything is being centered right now is because right now the container for the image is inside a flex box that we set to center everything when it comes to the horizontal axis. So by setting the container to 60%, it is now smaller, but also being centered. Does that make sense? You know, because it has a flex box going on it. So what we want to do now is we want to go back in here and just kind of take a look at the next thing we want to change. Now, the next thing is I actually want to change my text here, because right now we have a flex basis set to 455 pixels. And now instead of having this fixed pixel amount, let's actually go and try 100%. Now I know this is not really going to be looking that good because going inside our website and refreshing it, you can now see that my text is still a little bit close to the screen. Let's go ahead and change the wrapper because I do think that overall inside this website here, having only 10 pixels is a little bit too small. So what I can do is I can go back inside my main.css and inside the wrapper, let's go ahead and change this one to minus 40 pixels because that is going to make things twice as much when it comes to the spacing there. So what I can do is I can refresh it. And as you can see, everything is getting squished. Now, just to make sure we double check everything to see that everything is working like intended, there's nothing that broke, anything like that, because that is always important to check for whenever you change something like a wrapper, because that is going to affect many things inside this website here. But right now, everything is looking good. Going back inside the index.css, I want to go down to the next section here. Now, I do want to make sure that I change the text inside this About section, because right now everything is going to the right side of my screen, but I do actually want to have it centered inside my screen here. So what I could do is I could grab the h2 tag, because I do have an h2 inside this section here. So even though we don't have a specific styling targeting this one, it is actually being targeted by the main.css because we have a default styling for our h2 tags. So let's actually go ahead and customize this h2 tag and say we want to have a text align center. And then let's go ahead and do the same thing for the paragraph down here. So we're just going to make sure we replace the padding with a text align center. And the same thing goes for the anchor tag, because this is the call to action button when it comes to this section here. So we want to make sure that we just set a margin, just like we did with the last one. So margin is going to be 0 auto. And I think that's perfectly fine for now, because if I remember correctly, we do have some default padding or something going with the paragraph text to push away the h2 tag and the anchor tag. So I think this is perfectly fine. And the last thing I want to do here is just delete everything else, because I don't think we need all of this to be changed. So we can just delete it and save it. So going inside our website, refreshing it, you can now see that everything is looking pretty good. We have the text centered, we have the button down here. You could argue that maybe you want a little bit of spacing between the button and the skills down here, but that is something that we can just decide later on if you want to. Let's actually go and change it now. So inside the anchor tag, we can go in and say that we want to have let's start by 10 pixels at the bottom here, and just kind of go in and refresh it. And as you can see, we push down the content just a little bit. So you can always change that if you want to and mess around with it. But this is all we need to have for the About section. So we're almost done. Now we just need to have the footer done. And this is very interesting because now we have to go back inside our main.css, because our main.css has all the styling for the header and also the footer. So inside the main.css, let's go in and grab all the different footer stylings. We're just going to scroll up here until we find the footer. So right there. And we're just going to copy all the styling that we have here and go all the way down to the bottom and paste that inside our media query at the bottom here. So we're just going to paste it in, go back up to where it starts, So right here, as you can see, we have the footer main inside the media query, and we're just going to change the things that we need to change in here now. The first thing I want to do is I do actually want to go down to my footer testimony down here, and I do want to set this one to a display none, because I don't want to see the testimonies inside my mobile version. So going back inside, you can now see that we don't actually see it. So now we just need to change all of this content here. Now, we don't actually need to change anything when it comes to the footer main and the main flex that we have in here, so we can actually just delete those. And the next thing we want to change is going to be the get in touch section. So we can actually delete everything in between testimony and get in touch. Again, I know this because I set this up beforehand. And in here, I just want to make sure the margin is being changed slightly, because I think the spacing should be changed a little bit when it comes to the get in touch button that we have in here. So instead of having it as 40 on the top, 0 on the left and right, and 60 at the bottom, I want to have it set to 0, 0, and 60. So doing this, going back inside the website, you can now see that we have a little bit of less spacing when it comes to on top of the button there. So just to minimize that spacing a little bit. The next thing we want to do is we want to fix this section down here, because right now you can see everything is kind of doing something we've seen before. Everything is being forced next to each other and it's not jumping down to the next line, even though we have it set to flex. So what we can do, just like we did before, is we can go in and we want to set the sitemap down here, because that is the container right now that is doing all of these things. So that's actually going to delete the hover here, just to make sure we don't have that. I want to set a flex wrap and set it to wrap, because again, the default one is no wrap. So if we don't change this one or set this one in here, it is just going to be no wrap. So by doing this, going back inside the website, refreshing, you can now see everything is jumping below each other. Now, we don't actually need to change these sitemap anchor tags, so let's actually just go and delete all the styling for that. And the next one we're going to change is going to be the actual sections down here, because remember, we did actually use nth child to change some of these down. So right now, I don't actually want to have a border on the left side, because we did actually set that when it came to the section at the very bottom. So we had a little bit of a neat design element on the side there. So let's set a border left to none to remove that color, because I don't think we need to have it on a mobile version. And the padding left is going to be set to 0, because we do have a wrapper that is taking care of all of this for us. So we don't need to do this when it comes to this section here. So just to save this, to see how this is going to look like, you can see we have that border that is the pinkish color. When I delete it, or when I refresh, I deleted, and everything is going to be aligned to the left side. So now we just need to make sure everything is being centered and placed properly inside the footer here. So I'm going to scroll down to where we have this footer sitemap, nth child 1 and 2. And I do actually want to grab the third one as well, because in order to center this, we might as well just grab the third one and include it in here. So I'm going to set this one in. Now we do want to make sure we change this into a 3, because we do want to change the third one, and make sure we include that comma in between them. So we actually have 3 different ones. And what I want to do here is I want to change the flex basis to 100%. So it goes all the way from the left to the right. And I do also want to align the text to the center. So text align center. And I do also want to include a small padding at the bottom, because we do need to make sure that we have a little bit of spacing down to the next section there. So we want to say padding dash bottom is going to be 20 pixels, just to give it something. So doing this, going inside, refreshing the website, you can now see that we have everything centered and there's a small gap between the items. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to go and delete the next piece of styling here, because we don't actually need to have it. And when it comes to the paragraph, I do want to make a small change to it, because right now, if we were to go inside the website here, is it just me, or does this paragraph look a little bit weird? Like there's some weird spacing going on. This one line is very large and the small one down here is much smaller. So what I want to do here instead is I want to go in and say I want to have a padding, and I want to have it 0 from the top and bottom. And I just want to have it slightly larger when it comes to the left and right. So we're just going to go ahead and save this one, go back in, refreshing, and now I can see everything is just looking a little bit more boxed down there. The last thing we need to do is change the actual address that we have at the bottom there, because right now it is going to the right side of the screen. Now, I'm actually not too sure how this is going to affect the website when we have a flex grow set to 1 inside the 4th nth child. So let's go ahead and keep that one for now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the paragraph inside the nth child, and I want to set a text align to center. So instead of it aligning to the right side, we're just going to center it. So saving this, going inside the website, refreshing, you can see everything is looking perfectly fine. So we can actually go and delete the 4th nth child that we have here. And this is basically all we want to have. So right now, as you can see, everything is looking so good when it comes to our website. It is right now mobile friendly. If I were to go out inside the browser version and actually try and rescale this one manually, you can now see that if I were to do this, we have the browser version and I start pushing content. Again, we did not change anything except for the mobile version. So when I go down to the mobile version, boom, everything is being changed and everything is resizing according to everything below 600 pixels, so to speak. So again, we can scroll down and see how this is looking like. This is looking perfectly fine. Everything is looking good. We can keep scaling this and boom, it goes out to the desktop version. Boom. So we now have a mobile version essentially, but we do want to have one more thing, which is when we go in and we want to have the navigation at the top, we of course want to have that burger menu because we want to navigate pages inside our website. So now in order to get this burger menu, we're going to have to talk a little bit about JavaScript, but we're also going to talk about how to actually create it using HTML and CSS. Because before we start creating all the functionality of this button, where you can actually press it and then it opens and then you press it again and then it closes. Before we do all of that, we just need to create the actual menu first. So the way to do that, or at least one way you can do it, is just by going inside your body tag. And at the very top here, right above the header, we're going to create the burger menu and then just have it set to display none when we're inside the desktop version. So it's just being hidden away. And once we get inside the mobile version, we just show it inside the website. And that's just basically how that works. So let's go ahead and create a comment here just to make sure that we know that this is the burger menu. So we can actually go in and create a small comment and just say burger menu start. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a navigation tag, just so we have a navigation, because essentially we're going to be creating the same menu. So I can actually go down here and just copy paste the navigation we have here and just replace it. So instead of header main nav, we're going to go in and say we have a burger dash menu. And that is basically all we need to have here. We could also create a comment down here just saying burger menu stop, just to make sure that we know that this is the stopping point of this burger menu. And now what we need to do is we actually need to include the actual image for the burger menu inside this navigation we have down here. And of course, we're going to do the same thing to the burger menu button where we hide it inside the desktop view and then we show it inside the mobile version. So going down inside our navigation here, I'm going to go inside our social media part, which is at the bottom here where we have the Facebook and we also have the Instagram. And I'm just going to go and create the burger menu in here. So right after the Instagram, I'm going to create a div box and I'm just going to go and give this one a class, set this one to burger dash menu dash button, or BTN. And that's all we have to do when it comes to the HTML. So the next thing is we're going to go inside our main.css, because remember, this is going to be part of every page inside our website. So inside the main.css, I'm going to go right above my media query for the mobile version. I'm just going to go and create my burger menu at the bottom of our desktop version, just because I think it's nice to have it nearby. You can put it anywhere you want inside the desktop version, at the very top inside your CSS, but I'm just going to keep it at the bottom here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and say I want to target the burger dash menu, and I also want to target the burger dash menu dash button. And of course, we want to make sure we grab the class called this, and then I want to create some styling for it. I'm just going to set it to display none. And inside the media query at the very top, I'm just going to go and create all the styling for this burger menu. So at the top here, I want to first of all target the button. So we say burger dash menu dash button. And I want to set this one to display block. So right now, if you have something set to display none, the way you make it appear again is to set a display block. So now it's going to appear back inside the website. Then I'm going to set a width and a height. So I'm going to go ahead and give this one a 50 pixels width, since that is what my notes say. I'm also going to give it a height to 50 pixels. And what I want to do now is I want to give it two different background images, because I want to give it one where it's open and I want to give it one where it's closed. And then we're just going to hide one of these using JavaScript at the end. So what I'll do is I'll go in here and I'm going to set we have a background dash image. I'm going to link to the first image, and then I want to link to the second image. So using a comma, we're going to write a second URL. Now, the thing is, right now you might not have an icon for this. However, inside my image folder, I do actually have a separate folder called icons. And inside this one, I have a burger menu icon and also a closing button icon. And what you can do if you want to have some icons just like these is you can actually go to a website that provides free icons that I'll link below inside the description of this video here. And you can just go ahead and find any sort of burger menu icon that you want to have inside your website. Maybe you don't want it to look like mine, but you want to have something that looks a little bit different. And the same thing goes for a closing icon. So just download 2 images that you think is going to look really good for your website and put them inside a icons folder inside your image folder and rename them into burger-menu and close, just so you have the same naming as me. So first I want to go back one directory, then I want to go inside my image folder, then I want to go inside my icons folder, and then I want to grab my burger menu. And I'm going to paste it inside the second URL. And instead of burger menu, I'm going to grab my close.png. And then I want to make sure all the styling for the background image is like it's supposed to be. So below here, the next thing I'm going to do is set a background size. And I'm going to set this one to cover. Then I want to go down below and I want to set a background repeat. And I want to set it to no repeat. Then I'm going to go below again and set a background position. And I want to set this one, at least the first image, to center. And then I want the second image to be center, but also to have an offset of 50 pixels to the left side, which basically means we're pushing this image outside of the border of this container, so we can't actually see it, because right now, as you can see, we have a width set to 50 pixels, which means that if I take this background image and I move it 50 pixels to the left side, then we can't see it anymore. Actually, we're pushing it 50 pixels from the left side, to be more specific. So we're going to say left 50 pixels. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some styling for the actual burger menu, so the actual navigation that we have showing. So I'm going to say we have a class called burger-menu, and I'm going to open this one up. And inside of here, I want to set it to a display none, because I don't actually want to activate this one before I actually click the button to show it. So it's just going to be display none to begin with, because we don't actually have the menu opened yet. So going in here below, I want to set the next one to position fixed, because we want it to be fixed inside the browser or inside the device. And then the next thing is we're going to set a width to 100%. And then I want to set a height to 100 view height. And this is going to make sure that it actually covers the screen when we actually open it up there. Now we do need to set one more thing, which is going to be a set index, because we do want to make sure that this is placed at a certain depth when it comes to placing the items on top of each other, because this has to be displayed on top of everything inside the website. But we do also want to make sure that we don't put it on top of the menu or the header at the top of the website. So it has to be between the header and the content of the page. So we're going to set it to 900, because if I were to go up inside my header up here at the very top, you can see that right now we have a set index inside the browser version set to 1000, meaning that it's not going to go on top of the header, but it's going to go right below it, but on top of the content inside the page. So it's very important we have this set index set to 900, okay? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set a background color for this navigation, and I'm just going to set it to something like 111, because that is a very dark gray color. So 111. Next, I'm going to copy this and paste it below, because I want to target the actual unordered list inside this burger menu. So we're going to say burger menu space UL, and then we're going to start styling things in here. Now I do want to start by setting a width to 100%. Then I want to go below and set a height. And I want to set this one to a calculation, because I want to calculate something here. And I want to set it to 100 view height minus 60 pixels. The reason we're doing this is because right now the header inside the website that is on top of the menu is 60 pixels tall. So because it's 60 pixels, we want to just go ahead and push it down a little bit so it's not below the header. I do also believe we need to set a padding then, because we need to have a padding top set to 60 pixels, because we want to make sure that even though we're making it 60 pixels not as tall when it comes to the height, that it's still being moved down below the actual header. So having a padding top set to 60 pixels is something that I think we're going to be having. I don't have this in my notes, but I can imagine that we need to have it. So let's just go ahead and see how this is going to look like. The next thing I want to do is I want to set a display to flex. And then I want to make sure that we have a flex wrap going to be wrap because I want all these list items to actually go below each other inside this navigation here. So I do also want to say align content, and I want to set it to flex start. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the actual list items and do something to them. So going down below, just copy pasting, we can say we have the list items. And I'm just going to delete everything that we have in here and start over. And the first thing I'm going to set is a flex basis set to 100%. I'm also going to go ahead and include a border because I want to have a small border between all the different menu items so we can see these as buttons. So just give it a slight border that is slightly lighter gray or something. So we can say border dash top is going to be set to 2 pixels. I also do want to set this one to a solid color. And then I want it to be a completely black color, just to make sure that we can actually see this border, so it's a different color than the background color. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this and copy paste it, because now I want to target the actual anchor tags inside this list item. I'm going to delete everything. And what I'll do is I'll set this one to display as block, so we can actually set a width and a height and all that. So after doing this, we want to set a height to 100 pixels or 100%, which basically means it's taking up all the space inside the list items. I want to set a font size, and I want to set a size to 3 rem. I want to give it a padding, and I want to set this padding to 30 pixels from the top and bottom. And I also want to set this one to 0 from the left and right. Then I want to set a flex basis and set this one to 100%. And lastly, we want to make sure we have a text align center. If I were to do this and actually go ahead and not set this one to display none, just so we can see it inside the website. So we set this one as block, go back inside the website, refresh it. You can now see that once we go inside the mobile version, we now have a menu going on inside the website here. And like I said, inside my notes, I did actually not have 60 pixels on top of my navigation here. So let's actually just go ahead and remove that again, because I did remember something about it being pushed down by default. So we can actually just go ahead and go in and remove the 60 pixels from the top. And if we were to go back in here, you can now see that we don't actually have that extra spacing. We do have one more thing that we want to fix here, which is that right now, I don't actually have any sort of border on the last button down here. It just kind of like looks like it's floating there because there's no border. So what I can do is I can go down and I can actually go ahead and copy paste my li item. And I want to say that I want to grab the last child element inside of the list item type and do something to it. So just like we used nth child before, I can actually go ahead and say last child instead. Then we can just go ahead and set a border not to the top, but at the bottom to 2 pixels, solid and black. So if we were to go in here and refresh it, you can now see we have that last border at the bottom there. The last thing I'm just kind of noticing here is that the social media icons is kind of close up against my button here. So let's actually go ahead and push that out a little bit. So going back up inside my button here, I can actually go ahead and say we want to include a margin to the left and just set this one to something like 10 pixels, just to give it a little bit of spacing there. So going back in, refreshing, you can now see we push them out a little bit, so it looks much better. So now we actually have everything that we want to create when it comes to the HTML and CSS. And now we're going to get started on the JavaScript part. Of course, you do want to make sure you go inside your CSS and change it back from block to none again, because we want to make sure this is hidden as soon as we open up the website for the first time. So I'm just going to save it here. And going back in, refreshing, you can now see that this is how it's going to look like once we open up the website. And then once we click the button, we're going to change it from display none to display block. So then it's going to show the entire menu inside your website. So let's talk about JavaScript, because we haven't talked about JavaScript before. This is actually the next step after learning HTML and CSS. You would typically get started using JavaScript. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating a folder inside the main root folder. So I'm going to create a new folder here. I'm going to call it JS for JavaScript. So just like we have a CSS folder, we also have a JavaScript folder. Inside this one, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this one main.js, which is the JavaScript extension. So we're just going to save this one. And inside the index.html at the very bottom down here, I'm going to include my JavaScript file at the bottom, since I want to make sure all the HTML on top of here is loaded in before we start doing anything using JavaScript. So what I'll do is I want to go right above the body tag. And I'm going to create a script tag, meaning that I'm going to link to a script inside my file here. And the source is going to be the new file that we just created called main.js. So we can actually say we have a JS folder, and inside the JS folder, we have a main.js. So now we're linking to the JavaScript file, and it's actually going to include all the JavaScript code that we're including in here and actually run it inside the website. So what I'll do is I'll just copy paste my JavaScript code that I have on the side here. Make sure you include everything exactly like I've written it here, because otherwise this is not going to work. If you don't have a semicolon here, then it's not going to work. If you don't have a parentheses here, then it's not going to work. If you misspell something and you wrote "is burger open," then this is not going to work. So make sure that you write everything exactly like I've written it in here to make sure everything works correctly inside your website. So if your menu is not opening or closing, this is probably the fault and the reason behind it. So make sure everything is exactly like it's supposed to be by copying this that I have here. Basically what we're doing in here is we're grabbing the button, we're grabbing the actual menu, and then I'm setting a burger open equal to false, which is going to determine whether or not this menu is open or closed. Then I run a event to check if we actually click the button. And if we click the button, then I simply change is burger open to false or true, depending on if it's open or closed. And I just go in and change some of the styling inside my CSS based on that. So essentially we're just setting the display as block or none, as you can see, and then we're swapping the image position inside the background images to make sure that the proper image is being shown inside the button. So that is all we're doing here. So saving this, going back inside our website, refreshing it, you can now see that when I click the button, we now have a menu open. If I click it again, it now closes and everything is working like intended. So with all of this, you can now see that we have a mobile version of our website. And you can be very proud of yourself because this is something that some people find very intimidating, especially when it's their first time trying to create a responsive web design. So with all of this, this is how we can create a responsive website. This video is already very long, so I'm just going to go ahead and end it off very quickly here and say I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video.